It was that point that the Cubans made the decision to basically double the forces they had in Angola. Basically, if you wanted to find out how many Cubans there are, you start counting baseball diamonds from satellites, and we could look down.
Cuban Army regulations required a baseball field for every certain number of troops. So when they built a baseball field, a new one, you knew there was an addition of troops. When they closed a baseball field, you knew some had left.
Massive Cuban reinforcements were flown in to rescue the trapped MPLA forces. The final confrontation between the Cuban, Angolan, and South African armies took place around the tiny village of Cuito Cuanavale.
Now, if you see this type of air traffic, you've got to think. You've got to say, what the hell is going on? They started hitting us. We knew where the operation headquarters were. We knew where the anti-aircraft and the artillery, and we opened fire.
Achava-se que se ganhasse em Cuito Cuanavale, depois estava aberta a via para avançarem para o norte de Angola. E era um ponto importante de defesa estratégica, mas é uma vila. As pessoas falam da cidade do Cuito Cuanavale, aquilo é uma pequena vila. Tanto que nós às vezes trazíamos tropas, né? Tropas do centro ou do norte, vão para Cuito Cuanavale. Então eles desembarcavam na pista. Então quando a gente batia num quartel, né, eu lembro que uma vez um veio perguntar, disse, chefe, mas quando é que vamos à cidade do Cuito? Disse, estás na cidade do Cuito? Disse, é isto que eu venho defender. Dizia.
The whole effort was conducted by Fidel Castro, by telephone from Havana. He was a commanding officer. How you can do a thing like that, I wouldn't know. It's impossible. It gave us a problem from our side because we didn't know him. We didn't know his way of thinking, what type of personality he was. Because that's the thing you've got to know in war. You've got to know the chap on the other side as well as you know yourself. You must know his strong points and his weaker points. That's how you're successful. Otherwise, you're not.
The battle raged on, costing an estimated 25,000 lives. All sides claimed victory without managing to stop the war. The combat at Cuito Cuanavale lasted 6 months and became Africa's largest battle since World War II.
La historia de África va a tener un momento muy importante. Va a ser antes de Cuito Cuanavale y otra después de Cuito Cuanavale. La poderosa Suráfrica, los blancos, la raza superior, se estrellaron contra un pedazo de territorio defendido por negros y mestizos. Pero no estamos buscando ese objetivo. Sino una solución razonable. Puede ser que pierdan no solo Namibia, puede ser que pierdan el apartheid. Queremos que este problema se resuelva ahora. Y creo que estaremos en la antesala de la solución del problema del apartheid.
Stalemate on the battlefield was exactly what Chester Crocker needed to revive the peace talks. The only way out was a negotiated solution between governments, and that, by definition, excluded Jonas Savimbi. But before Crocker knew it, the Cubans came up with a surprise.
Well, I was in the National Security Council, and I got a call from Peggy Delaney, the daughter of Rockefeller, and she said, I'm here in Cuba on some sort of a meeting of NGOs, and Castro called me in and gave me a message.
The basic message was this diplomacy is missing a critical ingredient. Yes, that critical ingredient is direct physical Cuban participation. If there were to be Cuban participation, this diplomacy would be more realistic and it would have better prospects for success. And the Americans' continued refusal to talk directly to the Cubans and to include them in the negotiating process was an obstacle. It would be difficult to imagine a more direct hint.
So this led to a major dilemma. Do you sit at the same table as the Cubans? Now, Chester Crocker, of course, wanted to, but he knew that sitting at the same table as the Cubans was politically very dangerous inside the United States. So he went to see George Shultz, who very courageously said, I authorize you to meet with the Cubans, but you must talk only about Angola and Namibia. If they bring up the U.S. trade embargo or anything like that, refuse to talk about it.
The meeting took place at the presidential palace in Luanda. The Cubans had finally earned their place at center stage.
We knew they were next door because we'd been briefed. And at a certain moment we said, okay, let's try. Let's see if we can make this work. Invite your Cuban friends to join this process so they don't have to sit in the next room with earphones. They can actually be here at the table. So in came the Cubans, and they were just as pleased and as proud as you could imagine. There were smiles from ear to ear. They were delighted.
Estava sempre com cigarro na boca. Sabe, os americanos, lá nos Estados Unidos, por exemplo, nas salas de reuniões, na sala onde tem ar-condicionado, mesmo no restaurante, não se pode fumar. Né? E por isso foi uma surpresa, e na reunião estar aí o risqueio a poluir a sala toda com fumo do tabaco, que tem um cheiro.
Yo, muy satisfecho, con toda intención, fui con mi tabaco para darle un toque cubano a las negociaciones. Los cubanos fumamos tabaco y somos los productores de los mejores tabacos del mundo.
The air became heavy for some of the non-smokers in the room. Risquet, a very jolly fellow with very sort of rotund presence, very outspoken, and most of his interventions took minimum 20 minutes.
Primero hay una primera discusión sobre el cese del apoyo de Estados Unidos a la UNITA, y creo que le dice a los angolanos, bueno, pero el cese del apoyo de Estados Unidos a la UNITA es un problema entre angolanos y norteamericanos, no es de cubanos. Cuando vino el punto de la retirada cubana, en que estábamos dispuestos a estar hasta que se liquidara la PAJEI, pero los angolanos no estaban de acuerdo en llevar la cosa tan lejos. Y la solución que habíamos acordado, solución global con retirada total.
At last, the South Africans, Angolans, Cubans, and Americans sat to discuss concrete steps to end the war. But the fighting at Cuito Cuanavale continued, and every minor victory or loss altered the givens at the negotiating table. The next meeting, held in Cairo, would make or break the peace process.
When ministers get around a big table in a major capital like Cairo, they really can't help themselves. They just can't resist microphones. And they just go from bad to worse. And Risquet managed to say things about Cuba's heroic contributions to African stability and development, and Cuba's intention to see to it that peace would come when there was an end of apartheid and when there was an end of this and an end of colonial rule in Namibia.
It was a meeting almost of emotional hatred. Mr. Risquet, he started by launching a vicious attack on us. Vicious. Saying, you've always been imperialists, racists, capitalists, causing trouble wherever you went, etc., etc.
At that point, Puk Botha and Magnus Milan just went after the Cubans, and it was very dramatic. And it was basically a test of manhood. A lot of testosterone in the atmosphere, I think is the way to put it.
Entretanto, começaram a haver declarações do Puk Botha, dizendo que Angola ia nacionalizar as tropas cubanas como angolanos para ficarem lá, ia casar cubanos com angolanas, né, para eles serem angolanos, uma série de manobras. Nós sempre está bem.
Porque decían que íbamos a dejar ahí cubanos como casados, como matrimonio, para dejar tropas camuflada. Un absurdo. Desde luego le contestamos con mucha fuerza. Le dijimos que no podíamos decir el número de matrimonio porque en Cuba el matrimonio es una cosa libre entre personas de dos sexos. Y ahí que en Cuba ni en Angola había la Moral Act que había en Sudáfrica, donde se prohibían los matrimonios birraciales.
Nós também queríamos fazer um pedido. Queremos saber quantos negros estão em prisão, que estão nas prisões do apartheid da África do Sul. Se eu fosse jovem, jogávamos aqui a soco, íamos jogar pancada, porque eu não admito uma coisa disso. Então, aí tá bom, intervalo. Calmar as coisas.
Un tabaco ahí. Vengo a buscar un tabaco, señor de la prensa.
Only for a cigar.
I'm not making any statement, I'm just looking for a cigar.
It seemed the talks were headed for total breakdown. But later that night, an unexpected turn of events opened a new window of opportunity.
We went for a drink in this pub in the Cairo Hotel. There were some Cubans, including Mr. Risquet. Then we had a drink together, and I said to him, has it ever occurred to you that we could both be winners? And he chuckled in his drink, and he said, what do you mean? And I said to him, look, to put it in simple terms, if we carry on with this war, we will both be losers. If you withdraw your troops on the basis of having given Namibia its independence, your leader, Fidel Castro, can claim that he won. You claim a victory of a greater nature, namely the freedom of the people of Namibia you have achieved. And I say to the white voters of South Africa, I got rid of the Cuban troops in Angola. And our war is also ended. That makes us both winners. And suddenly I could see a total dramatic change in his whole attitude.
After the Cairo meeting, a ceasefire at Cuito Cuanavale was implemented. But it wasn't easy to clinch the final deal. Having South Africa show its goodwill by at least releasing the legendary prisoner Nelson Mandela became a sticking point.
The whole world was descending on us. Apartheid was viewed as a prime evil. The release of Mr. Mandela was demanded. I knew that we had to reduce the tension to be able to release Mr. Mandela and the other political prisoners. If we could not do so, and the only way to relieve the tension in southern Africa was to come to an agreement and end the war in Angola.
By forcing the South Africans to trade the independence of Namibia for the Cuban withdrawal, that in the end justified everything to Castro, that he could think of himself as having been the father of Namibian independence and the man who ended colonialism in Africa. Cuba, in fact, demonstrated a level of responsibility in its behavior and maturity in its judgment that arguably should have been recognized by the United States as an important gesture deserving some response. But the politics of this in the United States, that is, the politics of relations with Cuba, are poisonous in the extreme. So in the end, Cuba, which acted responsibly and should have been acknowledged for doing so, got no such acknowledgement.
On December 22, 1988, almost 1 month to the day before the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency, peace accords were signed in New York. The parties simultaneously signed documents granting Namibia's independence and ensuring the withdrawal of Cuban troops from Angola. The withdrawal of 450,000 Cubans was scheduled to take place over 30 months, ending 13 years of Cuban military presence in Angola. A month short of the deadline, the last Cuban soldier left the African soil. With him, ended the epic of Cuba's military support for African revolutions.
Y como habíamos dicho, de Angola solo nos llevaremos los restos de nuestros hermanos caídos. No nos traemos ni petróleo, ni diamantes, ni nada, sino los restos de los compañeros que murieron. Y aquel 7 de diciembre, al mismo tiempo, en todos los cementerios del país, al mismo tiempo, a una misma hora, recibieron sepultura a todos los combatientes caídos en África.
The total number of Cuban casualties remains one of the island's best-kept secrets. But military historians agree that at least 10,000 Cubans died in Angola.
En ese periodo que retiramos las tropas de Angola, vinieron también un batallón que teníamos en el Punta Negra, en la República de Congo-Brazzaville, y las tropas que teníamos en Etiopía. En ese periodo regresaron todas las tropas a casa. Y desde el día en que el Che cruzó aquel lago, Tangañica, y llegó a Zaire, que fue el 24 de abril de 1965, hasta ese 25 de mayo de 1991, transcurrieron lo que llamamos la gran epopeya de Cuba en África. Transcurrieron un cuarto de siglo, un año, un mes, un día.
The battle to liberate Africa from colonialism had been won, but the war conducted in the name of real independence is still being fought. Revolutionaries like Che Guevara, Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral and Agostinho Neto are today icons all over the continent. Their words still echo in African shanty towns as inspiration to follow if Africans are to change their lot. The means to achieve true independence may be different today, but this objective has never changed.
La la la